I have never aspired to luxury. Even now, when my 74 years are marked with wrinkles like rings on a slice of wood, I still prefer a worn sweater to expensive cashmere. My old 97-year-old Volvo has long been the subject of ridicule from my son. That wreck isn't even worth the gasoline you put in it, Rupert says, every time he tries to convince me to buy something new. But I refuse. This car is like me. It may not be flashy, but it's reliable and has served me well for many years. My name is Anthony Hardison. In Sanford Township, I'm known as the owner of the Blue Harbor Hotel on the shores of Lake Monroe. But my family has no idea. To them, I'm just an old man, a former construction worker barely making ends meet on a measly pension. The November wind drives fallen leaves across the hotel parking lot. I lean against the railing of my office balcony, watching the last guests of the season load their suitcases into the trunks of their cars. Soon there will be a lull, and the hotel will only take in locals visiting for the weekend. I love this time of year. You can pay more attention to the details that escape notice in the summer. Mr. Hardison, accounting is on the phone for you. Sydney, my assistant for 15 years now, peeks in the door. She's the only one who calls me Mr., even in private, even though I've asked her repeatedly to switch to Anthony. Thanks, Sydney. I'll call you back in 5 minutes. As the door closes, I return to my thoughts. The hotel is my brainchild, the result of 30 years of hard work. Once it was just an old motel with a leaky roof and rusty pipes. I bought it for nothing when I was 44 and invested all the savings I'd made on the construction site. People thumbed their noses at it, but I saw the potential. I remember the day my late wife Helen and I stood in front of the peeling facade. "Are you sure this is a good idea, Anthony?" she asked, holding her hat against a gust of wind. "No," I answered honestly. "But if I don't take a chance now, I'll regret it for the rest of my life." Helen smiled then and squeezed my hand. "Then we'll take the risk together." She didn't live to see the day our modest motel became a four-star hotel. Cancer took her 10 years ago. Sometimes I think I see her silhouette in the hallways, hear her voice in the sound of waves crashing against the lakeshore. After Helen died, I went to work. The hotel became more than just a business. It became my raison d'être. Every morning I was the first one in and the last one out. I knew every employee by name, from the chef to the cleaners. Appreciated their labor because I started from scratch myself. Perhaps it was this passion for work that drove him away from his son. Rupert was a teenager when I bought the motel. In those years, money was tight, so we saved money on everything. While the kids of his classmates were getting new bicycles and game consoles, Rupert was finishing off my old sweaters, restitched by Helen. "Why are we so poor?" he'd ask, returning from visiting his buddy's house, where they had just installed a home theater. "We're not poor," I answered. "It's just that right now we need to invest in the future." He didn't understand. To a child, the future is an abstract concept, and the lack of fancy sneakers is a very concrete problem. When things got better, I could change our lifestyle. Buy a big house, an expensive car, send Rupert to a prestigious college. But something stopped me. Maybe the fear that sudden wealth would spoil my son, or a stubborn desire to prove that you can be happy without expensive toys. Or maybe it was just an austerity habit ingrained in my blood from years of want. Whatever the case, I decided that Rupert should make his own way in life, as I had once done. After high school, he went to a local college, not the most prestigious, but a decent one. I paid his tuition, but I didn't give him money for entertainment. "You want a new cell phone? You have to earn it," I said, which made him deafeningly irritated. After college, Rupert joined an insurance company. He started small but gradually worked his way up the ladder. I was secretly proud of him, though I rarely expressed it out loud. We men of the Hardison family were never generous with our feelings. Meanwhile, Blue Harbor was thriving. I reinvested profits, expanded the property, and built a convention center that attracted business clients. 10 years after I bought it, the hotel was already ranked among the top 10 in the state. 15 years later, it was being written about in travel magazines. Now, 30 years later, the Blue Harbor is a brand known far beyond Sanford. But at home, I was still the deadbeat dad. I lived in the same modest one-bedroom apartment, wore the same simple shirts, drove the same old Volvo. Rupert thought I was barely making ends meet on a former construction worker's pension and a modest salary as a consultant in some hotel. I never told him the truth. First out of principle, then out of stubbornness, and then the moment for a frank conversation was hopelessly missed. The wider the gulf between us grew, the harder it became to confess. Mr. Hardison, accounting is waiting. Sydney reappears, bringing me back to reality. I nod and sit down at my desk. The reports show another record quarter. Profits are up 12% over last year. The marketing director suggests opening a second hotel in a neighboring town. It's a good idea, but it needs careful analysis. At my age, new projects are a risk. On the other hand, what have I got to lose? Rupert has no interest in the hotel, and after my death, he will probably just sell the business. Sometimes I imagine his face when the lawyer reads the will. Shock, disbelief, maybe even anger. "Why have you kept this from me all my life?" he'll ask. And what do I answer from beyond the grave? I put the papers aside and pull a photograph out of the drawer. It shows Helen and me with little Rupert on the beach. The boy's about 5 years old, missing a front tooth, and his smile is so wide it looks like it's about to tear his face open. Helen laughs with her head tilted back, the wind ruffling her hair. And I hug them both, as if trying to protect them from the whole world. When did everything go wrong? At what point did we lose the intimacy that was captured in the photograph? The phone on the table rings, distracting me from my unhappy thoughts. It's Rupert, which is unusual in itself. He rarely calls for nothing. "Dad, what's up?" His voice sounds unnaturally cheerful. That's what happens when he needs something. "Fine," I reply. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong." He pauses. "Just wanted to tell you that Claire and I are thinking of coming to Sanford this weekend." Claire is his wife. We've only seen each other 3 times. At their wedding 2 years ago and twice at Christmas. She's the kind of woman who looks past people like me. To her, I'm a poor father-in-law, an unfortunate reminder of her husband's humble origins. "What brings you to our land?" I ask, though I already guess the answer. "Claire's having a real estate conference," Rupert explains, "and I thought I'd take a couple days off and spend some time with you." "Okay," I say. "I'd love to see you." We exchange a few more sentences and say goodbye. I lean back in my chair, looking up at the ceiling. A real estate conference. I know about this event. It's going to be held at my hotel. One of the biggest events this fall. It's ironic. Claire will arrive at the Blue Harbor, not even realizing that the hotel is owned by her beggar father-in-law. I wonder what she would say if she knew the truth. Would her attitude toward me change? Sydney peeks into the study. "Is everything all right, Mr. Hardison? You look worried." "It's fine, Sydney." I straighten up in my chair. Just family stuff." She nods understandingly and closes the door. Sydney knows about my situation with my son. She's probably the only person I can talk to about it, frankly. I look at the picture again. What would Helen say? She's always been the voice of reason in our family. "Pride is a bad counselor, Anthony," she often said. But it's not just about pride. It was about principles, about the values I wanted to pass on to my son. I wanted Rupert to understand that real wealth is not in expensive things, but in what you create with your own hands. That a man is worthy of respect, not his bank account. That character is more important than looks. But it was the other way around. Rupert grew up believing that money was the main indicator of success. He married a woman who shared those beliefs, and now they both look at me with ill-concealed pity. Maybe I was wrong all these years. Maybe I should have been upfront from the beginning, to show my son that hard work and perseverance are indeed rewarded, but not in an abstract future, but here and now. I close my eyes, imagining an alternate reality where Rupert grew up knowing of my success. Would he have become a different person? Or would he have turned into a spoiled brat, living off his father? I'll never know. The rest of the day passes in the usual routine. Meeting with the chef about the new menu, checking the rooms after the major renovation, negotiating with the company installing the solar panels. At 74, I'm still absorbed in all the details of the business, even though I could have retired long ago, leaving the management to hired managers. On my way home in the evening, I make a small detour to drive past the house where Helen and I lived when Rupert was a boy. The modest one-story cottage now looks neglected. The new owners clearly haven't put any thought into its upkeep. But I slow down anyway, looking at the familiar shape of the roof. The old apple tree in the yard. This is where the dream of owning my own business was born. This is where Helen and I used to draw plans for the future in the evenings after putting our son to bed. Imagine, Anthony, she'd say, your own hotel. People would come from all over the country to enjoy its coziness. She believed in me unconditionally. Even when I had my own doubts, Helen remained unwavering in her confidence. You can do it, she said. I know you can do it. And I did. I did everything we dreamed of, except there's no one to share it with. Helen's dead and my son thinks I'm a failure. At home, I heat up last night's casserole, pour a glass of whiskey, and turn on an old black and white movie. At 74, I lead a lifestyle that many would find depressing, but it suits me fine. In the hotel, I am a successful businessman. Here, I can be just a tired old man. Tomorrow, I have to prepare for the arrival of the participants of the real estate conference. My sister-in-law will be among them. I wonder if she would recognize me if we ran into each other in the lobby. Or would she pass by without so much as a glance from the man in the worn jacket? Well, we'll find out soon enough. In the meantime, another evening of memories and old whiskey. After all, I've earned the right to live my life as I see fit, even if no one understands it. I remembered Rupert's wedding not so much for the lavish ceremony as for the feeling of losing my son for good. The banquet hall of the Riverside Hotel, an ornate place with stucco and gilding, was filled with people, most of whom I was seeing for the first time. Rupert had insisted that everything be upscale. I had no doubt where such a demand came from. My son had met Claire Bardolph at a company party. She worked in luxury real estate. He worked for an insurance company. As Rupert tells it, she approached him on her own, interested in his potential. In human terms, she thought she could squeeze something out of him. I sensed something was wrong, but my son was dazzled by her looks and ambition. Claire grew up in a family with money, but not manners. Her father got rich on construction contracts, not always by legal means, as they said in town. Her mother, a former model turned shadow of a once beautiful woman, spent her days in beauty salons and at charity dinners, trying to maintain the illusion of youth. Their daughter inherited from her mother a slender figure and the ability to press her lips contemptuously, and from her father, calculating in firm belief that everything has its price. When I first met her at the dinner where Rupert had brought her to meet him, I knew at once that she was not the kind of person who loved unselfishly. I was sitting across from them in a medium-sized restaurant, more expensive than I would have chosen, but clearly not what Claire would have thought of as a decent place. She looked around with poorly concealed disappointment before pulling a welcoming smile onto her face. At last we meet, Mr. Hardison, she pronounced, extending her hand for a handshake. Rupert has told me so much about you. There was a slight southern accent in her voice, which she tried hard to hide. Apparently, her provincial background didn't fit the image of a successful lady she'd created for herself. Hopefully something good, I replied, shaking her cold palm. Claire laughed, too loudly, unnaturally. Of course, he said you were a very hard-working man. The pause before hard-working hid a lot of things. She clearly meant to say something else. Simple, humble, poor, any of those definitions that people like her use for people like me. Throughout the evening, she kept the conversation going, asking about my work, pretending to be interested in the life of a construction consultant. But her eyes gave her away. She looked at me like a strange animal in a zoo, with curiosity but no respect. Rupert didn't seem to notice. He looked at Claire with adoration, agreeing with her every word, as if she were speaking truths beyond the reach of mere mortals. Claire thinks I should go into corporate insurance, he informed me, as his fiancée retreated to the ladies' room. More prospects there. What do you want to do yourself? I asked. He looked at me puzzled. The same, of course. Claire is good at that sort of thing. In that moment, I realized that my son no longer belonged to himself. He had handed over the right to decide his fate to a woman who saw him not as a person, but as a project to be modernized. Suitable material to create a successful husband, handsome, obedient, with career prospects. When they announced their engagement 3 months later, I wasn't surprised. Claire received a diamond ring that I suspected had cost Rupert a few credits. It was always important for my son to live up to expectations. It had taken 6 months and apparently a considerable amount of money to prepare for the wedding. Rupert didn't say so explicitly. but I guessed he'd gone into debt. One day he called asking if I had an extra $10,000 for expenses. I refused, saying that all my savings were invested in pension funds from which they could not be withdrawn without penalties. That was a lie. I had money, more than enough to pay for 10 such weddings. But I knew that this money would not be used to create a family hearth, but to kick up dust. Crystal wedding glasses that would only be used once. A dress the cost of a used car. All the things Claire thought would impress her rich friends. I may have been cruel, but I still hoped that Rupert would one day have an epiphany. He'd see that the chase for appearances was an endless marathon with no finish line. That there was always someone with more expensive things, a bigger house, a newer car. The day of the wedding was sunny, one of those spring days when nature seems to demonstrate its perfection, reminding us of the futility of human attempts to surpass it. I stood at the church entrance in my new suit, the only concession I'd made for my son. "Dad, you could at least look a little presentable today," Rupert said, looking at me with undisguised disappointment. My suit, though new, had been bought at a thrift store, not tailored like his own. The watch on my wrist was worth less than the cufflinks on his cuffs. "I look quite dignified for the father of the groom," I replied, not wanting to start an argument on a day like this. Rupert sighed like I was a naughty child. "Just try not to embarrass Claire in front of her parents, okay?" Those words had my son all over them. A man who was more concerned about how he looked in the eyes of others than what really mattered. Well, maybe that was my fault too. I tried so hard to teach him to appreciate the simple things that I got the exact opposite result. The ceremony went off without a hitch, as a well-choreographed performance should. Claire showed an address from a famous designer. Her father led her down the aisle with the pride of a man who had made a good deal. The bride's mother cried, perhaps sincerely, perhaps because it was the proper thing to do. The guests, mostly Claire's friends and co-workers, gasped in all the right places. There were hardly any of my acquaintances in the church, just a couple of old friends from the construction site who felt awkward in the dressed-up crowd. I myself felt like a foreign body at this celebration of life. No, not because of the suit or the not expensive enough watch. It was because the son I'd raised had turned into a man ashamed of his father. When it came time for the banquet, things only got worse. Claire, now officially Mrs. Hardison, approached me with 2 glasses of champagne. "Anthony," she addressed me by name for the first time, as if we were now equals. "Ira, I wanted to thank you in person." "For what?" I asked, accepting the glass. "To Rupert, of course," she smiled, showing off her perfectly straight teeth. "You've raised a fine man." "I tried," I replied, clinking my glass with hers. "And you know," she continued after a pause, "I realize it wasn't easy for you. Raising him alone after your wife died, living modest." She pronounced the last word as if it were some kind of contagious disease. "We made it through," I said dryly. Claire put her hand on my shoulder as if comforting. "But things will be different now. Rupert will finally get what he deserves. I'll take care of it." Her words sounded like a promise, but I heard the threat in them. "I'll give him everything you couldn't give him," was what she was really saying. "The important thing is to be happy," I replied, finishing my champagne in one gulp. I didn't know then how much Rupert's life would change, how quickly he would become an appendage to his ambitious wife, adopting her views, her habits, her disdain for anything that didn't fit into the picture of an ideal world. A month after the wedding, they moved into a new house. Not bought, but mortgaged, of course. A 3-story mansion in a prestigious neighborhood, with a pool and a garden. A house they couldn't afford, to be honest. But Claire insisted, "We need to live up to our status." I visited them one day, bringing a modest gift, a painting by a local artist I'd bought at a show in Blue Harbor. Claire accepted it with a strained smile, immediately setting it aside in a corner. "Very original," she said. "We were just thinking about what to fill the pantry with." Rupert didn't step in for me. He just shifted uncomfortably from foot to foot, avoiding my gaze. Ashamed not of his wife's behavior, but of his father's failure to live up to the standards of their new environment. During that meeting, I noticed how my son had changed. He spoke differently, stretching his vowels, imitating the accent of graduates of prestigious universities. His clothes became more expensive, his watch more massive, but there was something new in his eyes, the worry of a man living beyond his means. "How was work?" I asked when we were alone. "Great," he answered a little too quickly. "I'm on my way to the regional director position." "Good for you," I said, though I didn't believe a word of it. Rupert nodded, then lowered his voice. "Listen, Dad, about Claire. She's just not used to people like us. She needs time." "People like us?" I interjected. "Well, you know," he mewed. "Ordinary ones, without special means." At that moment, I could have changed everything. I could have said, "Son, I'm richer than your wife's whole family combined." Show him the bank statements, the hotel papers, open up a world that had been hidden from him all this time. But I didn't say anything. Out of stubbornness. Out of a desire for him to appreciate me for who I am, not the thickness of my wallet. Out of fear that if he knew the truth, it would only harden him more, realizing how long I'd been deceiving him. Our meetings became less and less frequent. Rupert called once a month, then once every 2 months, then only on holidays. Each conversation turned into an awkward exchange of common phrases. "How are you?" "Fine." "Work?" "It's good." "Claire says hi." Lies, of course. Claire didn't even bring up my existence unless necessary. When they invited me over for Christmas, I was surprised. Usually, Rupert would cite that they were spending the holidays with her family or traveling, but something was different that year. I arrived at their house with gifts, a book for Rupert and a scarf for Claire. Nothing fancy, but chosen with heart. Everything in their house shone with holiday splendor. A giant tree decorated in the same style, wreaths of natural needles, candles that probably cost more than my entire Christmas tree. Claire met me in a dress more appropriate for a social gathering than a family dinner. Around her neck was a diamond necklace, a gift from Rupert, I found out later. "Anthony," she nuzzled the air near my cheek. "So nice of you to be able to come." "I always make time for family," I replied, handing her the gift bag. She looked inside and smiled strangely. "How practical." "Thank you." The scarf from a well-known brand cost more than she would have guessed. But what mattered to her was the lack of luxurious packaging and the designer's high-profile name. Rupert looked tense. He kept checking his phone, as if he was waiting for an important call. As we sat down at the table, set as if for a royal reception, I noticed that his hands were trembling slightly. "Everything okay, son?" I asked as Claire excused herself to the kitchen. "Yeah, sure." He tried to smile. "Just a little trouble at work. Nothing serious." I didn't question further. If he wanted to share, he'd do it himself. We'd long ago stopped being close enough to discuss real problems. Dinner passed in an atmosphere of feigned cheerfulness. Claire talked a lot about her accomplishments at the real estate agency, about the seaside house they were planning to buy next summer, about the cruise they had booked for the spring. Rupert was agreeing, but I could see the anxiety in his eyes. When it was time to exchange gifts, Claire handed me a box tied with a ribbon. Inside was a sweater expensive, but not my style at all. It was too bright, with a large designer logo on the chest. "Decided to update your closet a bit," she said with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "You can't keep wearing the same thing all the time." It wasn't a gift, but a message. "You're not good enough the way you are." I thanked her, knowing I'd never wear that sweater again. Rupert gave me a wristwatch not as flashy as his own, but still too flashy for my taste. "So you can finally throw out your old one," he said, clearly echoing Claire's words. I opened the box with the book I'd chosen for him, a biography of the architect who'd created some of the most impressive buildings of our century. Rupert had once been interested in architecture, dreaming of creating something beautiful and lasting. "Thanks, Dad," he said, leafing through the pages with polite interest. "Very informative." I knew from his tone that the book would go on the shelf and never be read. My son no longer dreamed of creating, only acquiring. After dinner, when Rupert and I were alone in the living room, I tried to have a real conversation with him. "Are you happy, son?" I asked bluntly. He looked at me with surprise. "Of course. I have everything I could ever dream of." "I'm not talking about things, I'm about life." Rupert looked away. "Not everyone measures happiness by your standards, Dad. For some of us, it's important to achieve something in this life. And you don't think I've achieved anything? He faltered, choosing his words. That's not what I meant. It's just, we have different ideas about success. And I don't want to be 70 and living in a rented apartment and driving a wreck. His words hurt, but I didn't show it. The important thing is that you're happy with your decisions. I am happy, he said firmly. Very much so. But I could see that he wasn't. Behind the facade of a successful life was a man cornered by his own ambitions and his wife's expectations. That Christmas evening was an indication of how far we had drifted apart. My son had become a stranger who spoke in learned phrases and looked at me with a look of ill-concealed pity. As I drove away, I caught Claire's gaze, cold, assessing. She looked at me as a nuisance, an obstacle to the perfect life she had planned for herself and Rupert. In her eyes, I was a living reminder that her husband was not of the world she longed to be in. The son of a construction worker, raised in a modest home, given an ordinary education. No matter how hard he tried, his background would always be a stain on the impeccable reputation she was building. Over the next year, we saw each other only once, at Rupert's birthday party, which Claire had organized at a fancy restaurant. I was seated in the far corner of the table, next to some distant relative of Claire's who was as out of place as I was. All evening, I watched my son play the part of a successful businessman, laughing at jokes he didn't think were funny, discussing topics that didn't interest him. When I left, Rupert walked me to the door. For the first time all evening, he looked genuine. "Thanks for coming, Dad," he said, and there was genuine gratitude in his voice. "I would never have missed your birthday," I replied. He nodded, then looked away, as if he feared we were being overheard. "Listen, I was wondering, do you have some money to lend? Just a little bit? Like 20,000? It's only temporary. I'll pay you back in a couple months." I looked him in the eye. "What's wrong?" "Nothing serious," he tried to smile. "Just a little financial hiccup. It'll get better." I could have given him that money. It would have been an insignificant amount of money to me. But I knew it wouldn't solve the problem. It would only delay the inevitable. "Son," I said, putting my hand on his shoulder, "if you have a problem, let's talk about it. Maybe there are other ways to fix things." The expression on his face changed. Hope was replaced by disappointment, then irritation. "Forget it," he pulled away. "Ashthorn, I just thought I could count on my father for help, but I guess I was wrong." "It's not about the money," I tried to explain. "It's just—" "I understand," he interrupted. "You don't have any. I'm sorry I asked." With those words, he turned back to his guests, leaving me alone at the door. I watched him walk over to Claire as she put her arm around his waist, whispering something in his ear. How he put back on his mask of a confident man with no problems. In that moment, I realized how much my son had changed under the influence of a woman for whom the most important thing was to maintain the illusion of perfection. Claire had created a bubble of luxury around them that was bound to burst. And when it did, who would support Rupert? Certainly not her. I could have intervened, told the truth, helped with money, tried to bring my son back to reality. But it was too late. He'd already made his choice, and it wasn't in my favor. On the way home, I thought about how strange life is. I hid my wealth so that my son would appreciate the real, not the material. As a result, he has become obsessed with money and status, married a woman who only sees him as a means to her ends, and turned into a man I barely recognize. Perhaps I've been wrong all these years. Perhaps the truth would have set us both free. But now it's too late. There's too much unspoken between us. Too many hurts and disappointments. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew that our paths would cross again, and that collision would not be a pleasant one. On Thursday morning, I stood at the panoramic window of my office, watching the preparations for the real estate conference. Employees were setting up registration tables, technicians were checking equipment, and florists were decorating the lobby with arrangements of fall flowers. Everything had to be flawless. Blue Harbor was known for its attention to detail. "Mr. Hardison," Sydney knocked on the door. "The first conference attendees are already arriving." "Thank you, Sydney. I'll be down in 5 minutes." I adjusted my tie. One of my best suits was worn today. Not out of vanity, but out of respect for the hotel guests. I'd always felt that an owner should live up to the standard of his establishment, even if most of the visitors had no idea who I was. Once down in the lobby, I took my usual position, an inconspicuous spot by a column from which I had a good view of the entire space. I like to observe the work of the hotel from inside, to see how well the staff worked together, how the guests reacted to the interior, service, and atmosphere. These observations allowed me to continually improve every aspect of Blue Harbor. The glass doors opened, letting in a new group of guests. Among the expensive suits and austere dresses, I immediately spotted her, Claire, in an impeccably fitting light gray suit, with her hair styled and an expression of slight superiority on her face. She looked like a person accustomed to luxury. Rupert was walking beside her, tense, with a strained smile. I thought they'd arrived yesterday, but apparently they'd chosen to stay elsewhere. I hadn't planned on approaching them. Rupert knew I was consulting at some hotel, but had no idea it was the Blue Harbor, much less guessed my true role. I hoped they would register for the conference and leave for the conference room without noticing me. But fate had it differently. While Claire was filling out the registration forms, Rupert looked around and saw me. "Dad," he raised his eyebrows in surprise, heading in my direction. "Hello, Rupert." I shook his hand. "Pops, I didn't expect to see you so early. And I didn't expect to see you here." He eyed my suit. "So this is the hotel where you're counseling?" "Yes," I nodded. "Been working here for years." Rupert looked confused. Apparently, he'd envisioned my job very differently. Some boring technical consulting in an office on the backside, not in one of the region's finest hotels. "It looks impressive," he said, looking around. "Must be a nice place to work." "Can't complain," I replied demurely. Claire was approaching us. Her face changed when she spotted me, a look of irritation for a moment, quickly replaced by a strained smile. "Anthony, what a surprise!" She held out her hand for a handshake. "Rupert didn't tell me you worked here." "He didn't know." I shook her cold fingers. "I didn't go into details." Obviously, her gaze slid over my suit. "Well, it's nice to see you in a decent." It was a jab, a hint that I usually looked inappropriate. I ignored it. "I hope you enjoy the conference. The program is very full." "Oh, I'm excited about this place." Claire looked around with professional interest. "Such potential, although some of the designs seem dated. I wonder who owns the hotel. Perhaps we should offer our services to modernize it." I barely held back a smile. "The owner is quite conservative when it comes to design, prefers the classics to the trendy." "Obviously," she puckered her lips. "Not to non, it feels that way." Rupert looked uncomfortable standing between us. He'd never been good at handling tension. "Dad, why don't we get together tonight? Have dinner together?" he suggested, clearly wanting to change the subject. Before I could respond, Claire intervened. "Honey, did you forget? We're having dinner with the Richardsons tonight. Very important clients." "Oh, yes," Rupert said, embarrassed. "Sorry, Dad. Maybe tomorrow." "Of course," and I said, "Don't worry about me. I've got a lot of things to do, too." "I'm sure changing the light bulbs in the rooms requires your direct involvement," Claire said with poorly concealed sarcasm. I decided not to respond to the barb. Years had taught me that the best response to provocation was to avoid it. "I should get back to work," I said. "Have a nice day." I headed for the elevators, feeling Claire's gaze on me. Something told me our next meeting would be even less pleasant. All day I'd been busy with the day-to-day business of the hotel, meeting with vendors, checking paperwork, dealing with the small problems that inevitably arise in a large household. But my thoughts kept coming back to this morning's meeting. The way my daughter-in-law looked at me with poorly concealed contempt, to the confusion on my son's face when he saw me in an environment that did not correspond to his ideas about my life. In the evening, having finished my business, I went down to the hotel restaurant. Normally, I preferred to dine at home, but tonight I decided to stay in, partly because I was tired, partly out of curiosity. I wanted to see how the conference I had worked so hard to organize was going. The restaurant was filled with participants of the event. At one of the center tables, I saw Claire and Rupert with an older couple, apparently the important clients. Claire was chatting animatedly, laughing often, clearly trying to impress. Rupert sat next to her, sometimes interjecting, but mostly just nodding at his wife. I took a table in the far corner, from where I could watch them without being noticed. The maitre d', Frank, who had worked at the Blue Harbor almost since it opened, came over to take the order. "Good evening, Mr. Hardison," he bowed slightly. "The chief recommends the salmon with wild mushroom sauce tonight. And if I may say so, 21 was a very good year for our Pinot Noir." "Thank you, Frank," I smiled. "I'll trust your choice." While I waited to order, another group of guests entered the room. Young men in expensive but carelessly worn suits. It was clear from their loud voices and swaggering demeanor that they had already had a few drinks before dinner. One of them, a tall blond man with a smug expression, spotted Claire and headed toward her table. "Claire Bardolph!" he exclaimed. "I didn't expect to meet you here." Rupert tensed. It was noticeable even from a distance. Claire, on the other hand, brightened. "Brandon, what a surprise!" She stood up, allowing the blonde to kiss her cheek. "Let me introduce you to my husband, Rupert." The blonde shook Rupert's hand carelessly, barely glancing at him. His attention was completely focused on Claire. "You're still just as gorgeous," he said with a smile that could have been described as predatory. "Will you join us? We're going to have a nice celebration of successful transactions." Claire cast a quick glance at the elderly couple at the table, then at Rupert. "Unfortunately, we have an important business meeting," she replied. "But maybe later." Brandon nodded understandingly. "Sure, we'll be at the rooftop bar." He withdrew, joining his rowdy friends. Claire gave him a look of regret. Rupert said something to her. I couldn't hear what it was, but I could tell from his gestures that he wasn't happy. Dinner was brought to me, and I concentrated on eating, trying not to watch the family drama unfolding a few feet away. Half an hour later, the elderly couple said their goodbyes and left the restaurant. Claire immediately stood up. "I'm going to go freshen up," I heard her voice, "and maybe take a peek at the roof." Brandon represents a very promising real estate development company. Rupert remained seated at the table, twirling his wine glass thoughtfully in his hands. He looked like a man who had lost something but hadn't realized it yet. I finished my dinner and paid, though usually my expenses were just charged to the hotel bill. As I left the restaurant, I couldn't resist walking over to my son's table. "Rupert," I put my hand on his shoulder, "is everything okay?" He flinched as if snapped out of a deep reverie. Yeah, sure. Just tired from the road." "Your wife seems to have found some interesting company," I said, nodding toward the exit where Claire had gone. Rupert grumbled. "It's just business, Dad. Claire is very driven. She's doing everything she can to advance her career." "Of course," I agreed, though I was thinking the exact opposite. "I won't get in your way. Good night." "Good night, Dad," he replied without looking me in the eye. I went up to my office, determined to finish some paperwork before going home. An hour later, Sydney knocked on the door. "Mr. Hardison," she looked concerned. "We have a little problem in the lobby. I think you should come downstairs." "What's wrong?" "One of the guests is acting inappropriately, and it seems to be your relative." I knew immediately who it was. As I walked down the hall, I saw Claire, clearly drunk, with disheveled hair and smeared lipstick. She was arguing loudly with the receptionist at the front desk. Rupert stood nearby, trying unsuccessfully to calm his wife. "What do you mean there are no rooms available in the suite?" Claire shouted, slapping her palm on the counter. "I know there are. My coworker just booked one." "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but all the suites are indeed taken." The receptionist, a young guy named Jason, kept professionally calm. "Accurate. You have a lovely suite overlooking the lake." "I don't need a beautiful suite," Claire interrupted him. "I need a suite. I'm not going to spend the night in this hole." Rupert tried to put his arm around her shoulders. "Honey, please, let's go back to the suite. You're not yourself." "Get your hands off me." She shoved him away sharply, nearly losing her balance in the process. A small crowd of gawkers had already gathered in the lobby, other guests attracted by the noise. I quickly approached the counter. "What's the problem?" I asked calmly. Claire turned to me, her eyes narrowed. "Oh, look who's here, the head light bulb consultant." She laughed, but there was no mirth in her laughter. "Claire, please," Rupert pleaded. "You're doing a scene." "I'm making a scene?" She turned toward him. "Are you? What are you doing, Rupert? Letting them treat us like second-class citizens." I tried to diffuse the situation. "I'm sure the misunderstanding can be resolved. Jason, maybe we should check again." The receptionist nodded, grateful for the intervention. Of course, Mr. Hardison. I'll take a look now. Claire stared at me. Mr. Hardison, they call you Mr. the counselor? Her tone became even more sarcastic. Or are you the janitor here? That's more like it. Rupert's poor daddy, who spent his life wearing rags and driving a wreck. Claire, stop it! Rupert raised his voice, which rarely happened. She ignored him, continuing to stare at me with drunken contempt. You know what the funny thing is? Your son married me because I represented everything he never had. Status, the connections, flavor. She swayed but steadied herself. And it turns out he can't even secure me a room in a decent hotel. Rupert looked like he'd been punched. Pale, with a frozen expression of pain on his face, he seemed suddenly aged. Mr. Hardison, Jason turned to me, glancing nervously at Claire. Unfortunately, all the suites are indeed occupied for the rest of the week. Claire made a dismissive sound. Of course they are. There's never room for the likes of us. But for all sorts of... She looked around the lobby, stopping to look at an elderly couple, modestly dressed, obviously not among the rich guests. There's always a room for people like that. I felt anger boiling up inside me. It was one thing to disrespect me, and quite another to insult the other guests of my hotel. Claire, I think you should go get some rest, I said firmly. You're tired and not quite in control of yourself. She turned to me, her face contorted with rage. And who are you to tell me what to do? A beggarly old man who works as an errand boy in a hotel, she laughed. Do you know what I say to Rupert every time he offers to visit you? Why should we see a man who has achieved nothing in life, who only embarrasses us in front of our friends? Rupert grabbed her arm. Stop this at once. You don't realize what you're saying. No, it's you who don't realize, she lashed out. Look at him, at his cheap suit, at his job. He'll always be a reminder of where you come from, that you don't belong in our circle. By now, the entire lobby was frozen, watching the drama unfold. The hotel staff looked around, not knowing how to react. I saw the guard at the entrance take a step in our direction, but stopped when he saw my warning glance. Claire continued, her voice growing louder. Your father is a loser, Rupert. Always has been and always will be. And now he's also a porter in a third-rate hotel. What a disgrace. She turned to me, her face contorted with anger. A pauper like you only brings shame to our family. Get out. Get out of here. There was dead silence. Even Claire seemed to realize that she had gone too far. Rupert stared at the floor, his shoulders slumped. And then something happened that no one expected. Jason, the young receptionist, came out from behind the counter and stood in front of Claire. Ma'am, he said in a voice shaking with indignation, how dare you speak to Mr. Hardison like that? Claire blinked, not realizing. What? That's our boss. Jason straightened to his full height. The owner of Blue Harbor. A whisper rolled down the hall. Claire's face changed. Arrogance slowly slid off it, replaced by confusion, then horror of realization. What? She turned toward me as if she'd seen a ghost. Rupert looked up, disbelief in his eyes. Dad? Is it true? I nodded, suddenly feeling strangely relieved. It was as if the weight I'd been carrying all these years had finally begun to fall from my shoulders. Yes, Rupert, I said quietly. I own this hotel for 30 years now. Claire staggered back, grabbing the front desk. That's impossible. Why not? I looked her straight in the eye. Because I'm a beggarly old man? Because I wear a cheap suit? Now I noticed the looks of understanding on the faces of those around me. Many of the regular guests knew who I was. The hotel staff even more so. Only my own family had remained in the dark all these years. Jason continued to stand between Claire and me, ready to defend his boss. I was pleased with his loyalty, but the situation required a delicate resolution. Thank you, Jason. I put my hand on his shoulder. I appreciate your support, but I think my family and I need to talk privately. He nodded, casting one last disapproving glance at Claire, and went back behind the counter. I turned to my son and daughter-in-law. I suggest we continue this conversation in my office, I said calmly. Rupert nodded silently, still trying to comprehend what he had heard. Claire stood with her mouth open, unable to utter a word. I turned to the people gathered in the lobby. I apologize for this misunderstanding. I wish everyone a pleasant evening. Slowly, with dignity, I headed for the elevators. Rupert followed me, leading Claire, who seemed to be in a state of shock. As the elevator doors closed behind us, I felt years of pretense, innuendo, and hidden bitterness ready to burst out. "Dad," Rupert began, but I held up my hand, stopping him. "Not here," I said. "We'll talk in the study." The elevator rose slowly, or so it seemed because of the oppressive silence between us. I stared at the reflection of our strange group in the mirrored wall, the old man who retained his posture and dignity, his son, lost and confused, his daughter-in-law whose arrogance had been replaced by fear, a family bound by blood, but separated by years of misunderstanding and misconceptions. I thought about what I would tell them, how I would explain my deception, if it was deception at all, and not an attempt to protect what I thought was important. About whether anything would change now that the truth was out. The elevator doors opened on the top floor of the hotel. I stepped out first, heading for my office, a spacious room overlooking the lake, furnished with understated elegance. "Have a seat," I said, pointing to the chairs by the coffee table. Rupert sat down, still looking stunned. Claire remained standing, her eyes feverishly surveying the study, the paintings on the walls, the antique desk, the immaculate view from the window. "All of this is yours?" Rupert finally said. I nodded. "Yes, and so much more." Claire stepped forward, her face contorted in an attempt to portray remorse. "Anthony, I didn't know. I wasn't myself. Please understand." "Shut up." I looked at her and something in my gaze silenced her. I walked over to the window, looking out at the lights of the city reflecting in the waters of the lake. At that moment, I had to decide what to do next. 30 years of secrets, misunderstandings, and disappointments had brought us to this point. And now that the mask had been ripped off, I stood at the window of my office, my shoulders feeling heavy. Behind me sat Rupert and Claire, both shaken, but for different reasons. The silence pressed on my ears as if it were a thunderstorm. I turned to face them. 30 years, I said softly. 30 years I've built and developed this hotel. Turned a dilapidated motel into a place that makes all of Sanford proud. And all that time, you, my son, thought I was a failure. Rupert looked up at me, his eyes a mixture of disbelief and resentment. "Why did you hide it? Why let me think you were barely making ends meet?" I sighed, searching for words. "How do you explain something you don't fully understand yourself?" At first it was just caution, I began. "When I bought this motel, invested all of our savings, a lot of people thought I was crazy. I was afraid of failure, and I didn't want you to be proud of something that could collapse at any moment." I paused, remembering those anxious, hopeful years. "Then when things got better, I thought about telling you. But you were already a teenager, with a certain way of looking at the world. I saw the way you looked at your rich classmates, the way you envied their stuff, and I figured you'd better learn to appreciate the things that really matter, not just expensive toys." Rupert shook his head. "But then, when I grew up, when I got married, you could have told me then." "I could have," I agreed, "but by then there was a gulf between us. You looked down on me, the poor father who never got real success, and the more distant you became, the harder it became to find the right moment to tell the truth." Claire, who had been sitting silent until now, suddenly straightened up in her chair. Her face changed, as if someone had wiped away the mask of horror and painted a new one, a benevolent, ingratiating one. "Anthony?" Her voice became soft, almost intimate. "You have been so wise, protecting your son from the temptations that money brings. Taught him to appreciate the real, not the superficial." I looked at her, unable to hide my skepticism. Just half an hour ago, this woman had called me a beggarly old man, and now she was talking about my wisdom. "Don't bother, Claire," I said dryly. "Your opinion of me was made abundantly clear in the hotel lobby." She blushed, but quickly pulled herself together. "I wasn't myself," she muttered. "Had too much to drink. That Brandon put something in my cocktail. I would never—" "Stop it, Claire," Rupert said abruptly. "Stop lying. You knew perfectly well what you were doing. She stared at her husband in disbelief. Apparently, he rarely spoke to her that way, but she quickly managed her surprise, her face taking on a guilty expression. "You're right," she sighed. "I have behaved terribly, and I apologize for it. I have no excuses." I watched this performance, feeling strangely detached, like I was watching a movie about strangers rather than my own family drama. "You know what the saddest part is?" I said, turning to both of them. "That it took a public scandal to get you, Rupert, to speak honestly for the first time in a long time. And the fact that you, Claire, are apologizing not because you're ashamed, but because you found out about my condition." Rupert flinched as if from a slap. Claire lowered her eyes, feigning contrition, but I could see her brain feverishly calculating new possibilities. "I suggest we all calm down and get back to this conversation tomorrow," I said, feeling suddenly tired. "It's late now, and we're all worked up." "Of course, Dad," Rupert stood up. "You're right. We need time to make sense of things." Claire stood up as well, continuing to play the part of the penitent sinner. "Anthony, again, I apologize for my behavior. I was stunned to learn the truth. But that's no excuse." I nodded without saying a word. I wished they would go away, so I could be alone and sort through the maelstrom of emotions raging inside. When the door closed behind them, I sank heavily into the chair. A secret I'd kept for decades had been revealed in a most unexpected and unpleasant way, and now I had to live with the consequences. I sat in my office until midnight, staring at the lights of the city and trying to figure out how I felt. Relief? Yeah, kind of. No more pretending. Disappointment? That too. In my son, in myself, in the way our relationship has turned out. Bitterness? Absolutely. The realization that behind all those years of reticence and alienation was my own stubbornness. When I got home, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, replaying the scene in the hall, the look on Claire's face when she'd learned the truth, Rupert's confused look, and thinking about what would happen next. The next morning began with a message on the answering machine. Rupert's voice unaccustomedly soft. "Dad, it's me. Claire and I would like to invite you over for breakfast. Like 10 o'clock in the morning at the hotel restaurant. Please call me back." I didn't call back. Instead, I simply showed up at the restaurant at the appointed time. They were already waiting, both impeccably dressed, with strange smiles on their faces. Claire, in an elegant beige suit, looked as if last night's scandal had never happened. "Dad!" Rupert stood up to give me a hug. "Thank you for coming." I let him hug me, but I didn't respond with the same warmth. Something inside me felt as if it had frozen. "Anthony," Claire held out her hand. "You look rested, despite yesterday's events." I shook her hand and sat down across from them. The waiter, Marco, who had worked at the hotel for about 10 years, came over to take the order. "Good morning, Mr. Hardison." He bowed slightly. "What will you be ordering?" "Good morning, Marco. I'll have the usual," I smiled. "And a coffee, please." "Certainly, sir." Rupert and Claire ordered their entrees, and when the waiter stepped away, there was an awkward silence between us. "So," I said at last, "what did you want to talk about?" Rupert coughed. "Dad, first of all, I want to apologize. For all those years when I underestimated you, when I thought you were, you know, a loser," I prompted. He wrinkled his nose. "I never thought of you that way. It seemed to me that you could do better if you wanted to. And it turns out I already have," I nodded. "I just didn't advertise it." Claire stepped forward, her eyes sparkling. "Anthony, I admire your modesty. In this day and age where everyone flaunts every success they have, you chose to quietly do your own thing. That's inspiring." I looked at her, trying to see the real Claire behind the mask of flattery, the calculating, cold woman who had called me the disgrace of the family just yesterday. "Let's dispense with that," I said. "We all know what happened yesterday, and we know why you look at me with different eyes today." Rupert and Claire looked at each other. He looked embarrassed. She looked annoyed, but quickly put a friendly expression back on her face. "We just want to make things right," Rupert said. "A fresh start. Get to know you again, the real you." I shook my head. "I haven't changed overnight, Rupert. I'm still the same person you've known all your life. It's just that now you know I have money." Claire stepped in again, her voice even softer. Not just money, Anthony, a successful business, the respect of the employees, status in the community, all the things you've achieved with your hard work and talent. Our order arrived, and I was glad for the interruption. We ate in silence for a few minutes. I watched them, Rupert fidgeting nervously with his napkin, Claire barely touching her food, obviously thinking about something else. I have a suggestion, she said suddenly. Why don't we take a family vacation? Go somewhere together. Spend time like a real family. Get to know each other all over again. Rupert perked up. That's a great idea. We could go to the coast or to the mountains. Where do you want to go, Dad? I sipped my coffee, peering at them over the top of my cup. In the last 5 years, Rupert had never once suggested that I go somewhere together. Now all of a sudden, such eagerness. Unfortunately, I have a very busy schedule, I replied. The hotel requires constant attention. But surely you must have managers, Claire persisted. Can't you take a little vacation? I'm sure the hotel won't fall apart in a week without you. I smiled. You know, Claire, that attitude is what separates a successful business from an unsuccessful one. I never thought I could just walk away and leave everything to my subordinates. She blushed but quickly pulled herself together. Of course you're right. I just thought family was important too. Absolutely, I agreed. But I hadn't noticed any particular desire for family togetherness until last night. Rupert interjected, trying to lighten the mood. Dad, we've all made mistakes. I've been a inattentive son. Claire said some unnecessary things last night, but we sincerely want to make things right. I looked at him carefully, trying to see the truth in his eyes. Is there genuine remorse there? Or just a realization of lost profits? What exactly do you want to make right, Rupert? I asked bluntly. The fact that you thought I was a failure? Or the fact that you now realize I could have been useful to you financially? He flinched as if I had slapped him. How can you say that? I'm your son. Yes, you are my son, I nodded. And that's why it pains me to see you trying to pretend that you're not driven by self-interest, but by a sudden awakened love for your father. Claire pressed her lips together, obviously holding back a sharp reply. Rupert looked confused. He was always lost in conflict situations. You're being unfair, he finally said. Yes, I was shocked to learn of your condition, but that doesn't mean I only want money from you. And what do you want, son? I asked, suddenly feeling tired. He faltered, choosing his words. I want for us to be a family again, so that there are no secrets and no secrets between us. I nodded. That's a worthy wish, but it requires honesty with myself first and foremost. Breakfast ended in a strained atmosphere. We agreed to meet for dinner at the end of the week, when the conference was over and Rupert and Claire were going home. I promised to think about their offer of a family vacation, even though I knew deep down I wasn't going anywhere. When I returned to my office, I found a bouquet of flowers on my desk, a gorgeous arrangement of white lilies and blue irises. Attached to the bouquet was a card with Claire's neat handwriting, with deepest apologies and hope for a new beginning. I looked at the flowers without much enthusiasm. A beautiful gesture, but too obvious. It was exactly how Claire envisioned an apology, a spectacular bouquet, a note written in pretty words. No depth, just an external effect. All day I'd been busy with the usual hotel business, but my thoughts kept returning to the morning's conversation. It wasn't so much Claire's behavior that bothered me. I'd expected nothing less from her, but Rupert's. My son, whom I had known from the first day of his life, who had once looked at me with adoration and trust, now seemed a stranger to me, calculating, insincere, ready to give in to his wife in any situation. When did this happen? At what point did I lose him? Maybe when I decided to hide my success, thinking I was teaching him to appreciate the present, or when I let him marry a woman for whom status and money were more important than human qualities. That evening, before I left for home, I got a call from Rupert. Dad, his voice sounded unnaturally chipper. Claire and I were thinking, why don't we have dinner together tonight? In town, not in a hotel. There's a great new restaurant on Oak Street. I can't tonight, I replied. I have a meeting with my suppliers. It was a lie. In truth, I just wanted to spend the evening alone, to gather my thoughts. Oh, Rupert was clearly disappointed. Well, maybe tomorrow? Maybe, I said evasively. I'll let you know. As I hung up the phone, I felt strangely devastated. Before, I would have welcomed any opportunity to spend time with my son. Now his calls only made me wary. What was behind this sudden attention? A sincere desire to mend relations or a cold calculation? At home, I pulled out an old photo album. Pictures of Rupert as a child, a smiling boy on a bicycle, a serious teenager at a school assembly, a young man in a graduation gown. My pride, my hope, my pain. Somewhere along the way, we lost each other. Me, because of a stubborn desire to teach him the value of hard work and simple joys. He, because of his desire for status and material symbols of success. Maybe we were both wrong. The next few days passed in a strange dance of mutual wariness. Rupert and Claire seemed to compete in their attentions to me. She sent flowers and fruit baskets to my office. He called several times a day, asking how I was feeling and asking to meet. The two of them invited me to lunches, dinners, even morning walks around the lake. I agreed to some of these meetings, declined others, and each time I watched their behavior change. Claire now addressed me with emphasized respect, listening intently to every word, laughing at my jokes, even the not-so-funny ones. Rupert constantly referred to my amazing business success as if trying to make up for years of neglect. But behind this ostensible benevolence, I sensed a falsity. I could see Claire tense up when I mentioned my modest apartment or my old car. I noticed Rupert's nervousness when money was mentioned. They were both clearly waiting for something. Recognition, forgiveness, maybe financial help. And that expectation hung between us, unspoken but palpable. On Wednesday night, over dinner in the hotel restaurant, Claire finally decided to get to the point. Setting aside her wine glass, she looked at me with carefully rehearsed sincerity. "Anthony," she began, "Rupert and I have been thinking a lot these past few days. About the past, about the future, about how our relationship might have turned out if we had known the truth before." I waited in silence for her to continue. Rupert sat with his eyes down, clearly letting his wife do the talking. "And we've come to the conclusion," she continued, "that we'd like to be closer to you. Not only emotionally, but professionally." "Professionally?" I raised an eyebrow. "Yes," she smiled. "You see, I have a lot of experience in real estate. I know how this market works, how to attract clients, how to create the right image. And I have a degree in business administration." Rupert picked up on that, finally looking up. "And a background in insurance. I could help with the financial side of things." I stared at them, feeling a strange mixture of disappointment and bitter amusement. So that was it then. They didn't just want a relationship, they wanted access to my business. "That's an interesting offer," I said calmly. "And where's sure it did. And what exactly would you like to do at the hotel?" Claire perked up, sensing I wasn't dismissing the idea out of hand. "I could be the marketing director," she said enthusiastically. "Develop a rebranding strategy, raise the hotel to 5 stars, attract a more upscale clientele. And I," Rupert spoke more confidently now too, "could look into finances, optimizing costs, maybe even expanding the business, opening new hotels in other cities." I nodded as I listened to them and thought about the fact that none of them had even asked if I needed help. Whether the hotel needed rebranding or expansion, whether I even wanted them to interfere with the business I'd spent decades building. "Have you considered," I asked when they were done, "that maybe the Blue Harbor is successful precisely because I'm not chasing 5 stars and status clientele?" Claire looked puzzled. "But isn't that what business is all about? To grow, to evolve, to strive for more?" "Not always," I shook my head. "Sometimes the point is to do something well and get satisfaction from it. Creating something of value, not just profitable." Rupert frowned. "But Dad, you could make a lot more money if—" "Why would I need more?" I interrupted. "I already have everything I need." They looked at me with bewilderment, as if I were speaking an unfamiliar language. And in that moment I realized how deep the gulf between us was. It wasn't just about money or status. We had different perspectives on life itself, on its values and priorities. "I'll think about your proposal," I said, though I'd already made up my mind. "In the meantime, let's enjoy dinner." The rest of the evening passed in strained conversation. I watched Claire and Rupert exchange glances, trying to figure out if their strategy had worked. I saw their disappointment when I was slow to make concrete promises, and felt myself realizing the falsity of what was happening more and more clearly by the minute. When I got home, I sat in my chair for a long time, thinking about what had happened in those few days, about Rupert and Claire's sudden epiphany, about their attempts to ingratiate themselves, about how quickly contempt had been replaced by ingratiation when they learned of my condition. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that a real relationship couldn't be built on such a foundation. You can't forgive betrayal if it's not sincere remorse, but cold calculation. I took out a notebook and began to write thoughts, feelings, memories, all the things that had accumulated over years of misunderstandings and disappointments. Maybe someday I'd show these notes to Rupert. Maybe someday he'll be ready to hear the truth. Not about money, but about what's really important in life. But right now I had a hard decision to make. In the morning, I called my attorney and set up an appointment. It was time to review my will and business structure. I could no longer trust my own son and his wife to run my life's work. Not after what I'd seen over the days. And in the afternoon, I met with Sydney and the other senior managers of the hotel. People who had been around for years, who had put not only hard work but soul into the Blue Harbor. People I really trusted. I have a proposal, I told them, and I want your honest opinion. They listened attentively, asked questions, discussed details. And when the meeting was over, I felt a strange peacefulness, as if I had finally found the right solution to a situation that seemed hopeless. In the evening, Rupert called again, inviting me to dinner. I accepted, knowing that it would be our last dinner together before they left, and perhaps the last opportunity to say what needed to be said. The Belvedere restaurant was perched on a hill overlooking Lake Monroe. The evening light was coloring the water surface with golden hues, and the first lanterns were lit on the shore. Rupert, Claire, and I took a table by the window that overlooked my hotel, the Blue Harbor, twinkling with lights in the coming twilight. Beautiful view, Claire said, fixing her hair with an elegant gesture. This restaurant is a real gem in Sanford. I nodded, not taking my eyes off the hotel. 30 years ago, there had been a dilapidated motel with a rusted sign in that spot. 30 years of hard work, sleepless nights, risky decisions. And the result is a building that makes the whole city proud. My legacy, something I built with my own hands. Dad, Rupert interrupted my musings, we wanted to thank you again for understanding and to apologize for everything that happened. I shifted my gaze to my son. He looked unaccustomedly serious, even solemn. Claire sat next to me with a smile that didn't affect her eyes. There's no need to revisit it again, I replied. Son, what has happened has happened. No, Dad, Rupert shook his head. This is important. I have to say, I was wrong. All these years I've been looking at you through a distorted prism. Thought you were, he hesitated, searching for words, that you hadn't realized your potential. And it turns out I was just hiding my success, I finished for him. He nodded, lowering his eyes. Yes, and I feel terrible about that, because of the way I treated you, the way I let, and he threw a quick glance at his wife. Concurti, how I allowed you to be disrespected. Claire immediately intervened, her voice turning honeyed. Anthony, I owe you an apology as well. My behavior was inexcusable, but believe me, I am truly remorseful, and I want to make amends. I looked at them, so beautiful, well-groomed, flawless in appearance, the son I'd raised and the woman he'd chosen as his life partner, my family. But did I feel connected to them? Did I see genuine remorse in their eyes or just fear of missing out? You know, I said, leaning back in my chair, all my life I've believed in one simple truth. A man is defined by his actions, not his words. It's what we do in difficult moments that shows who we really are. The waiter brought the menu and we ordered. When he removed himself, I continued. Rupert, you say you've been looking at me through a distorted prism all these years. But is that really the point? Isn't the point that you've judged me solely on material criteria? Not by what kind of father I am, what kind of man I am, but by how much money you thought I had. He flinched as if I had hit him. No, Dad, that's not true. No? I looked him in the eye. Then why did your attitude towards me change only when you found out about my condition? Why didn't you have an epiphany sooner? Claire put her hand on her husband's shoulder. Anthony, I think you're being unfair to Rupert. He has always respected you. You're lying, Claire, I said calmly. And we both know it. You despised me, considered me a burden, a disgrace to your family, and you've made no secret of it. She blushed but quickly pulled herself together. I wasn't myself that night. I said some terrible things that I regret now. It's not the words you regret, it's that you didn't know who you were saying them to. I shook my head. There's a difference. There was a tense silence. Rupert looked lost. Claire looked angry, though she tried to hide it behind a mask of remorse. The appetizers arrived, and we ate in silence for a while. I looked out the window at my hotel, at the city around the lake, and thought about how strange life was. All I wanted was for my son to appreciate hard work, honesty, real relationships, and what I got this. Fake smiles, insincere apologies, ulterior motives. Dad, Rupert broke the silence, I understand your feelings, and I know I deserve your anger, but I'm asking, give us a chance. Give me a chance to be a better son. His voice sounded sincere, and for a moment I felt a prick of regret. Maybe I was being too harsh. Maybe he really is remorseful. But then Claire spoke again, and her words dispelled that illusion. There's so much we could do together, Anthony. Imagine a family business, passed down from generation to generation. Rupert would carry on your business, and someday our children would... I held up my hand, stopping the flow of words. Claire, let's be clear. You're not interested in the family business. You're interested in access to the money this business brings in. She opened her eyes wide, feigning offended innocence. How can you say that? I only want Rupert to get what should rightfully belong to him. And what exactly should rightfully belong to him? I asked quietly. What I have created with my labor? What I've put 30 years of my life into, Rupert interjected, his voice trembling. Dad, I never claimed... No, son, I shook my head. That's exactly what you're seeking. Access to my fortune. A stake in my business. You talk about family ties, but you're thinking about bank accounts. Claire couldn't hold back any longer. Her face contorted, the mask of benevolence falling away. What did you expect? She hissed. Mafisha, that we'd put up with your poverty games forever? Pretend we enjoy your miserable lifestyle? Yes, we want what we deserve. What you've kept from your own son all these years. Rupert turned pale. Claire, please. But she didn't stop. No, Rupert, that's enough. Your father has manipulated you all your life, made you think he was barely making ends meet while he himself enjoyed his secret wealth. It's unhealthy. It's perverse. I watched this scene with a strange calmness. It was like watching a movie about strangers. This is the real Claire. There it was, the true face behind the mask of remorse. You know, I said when she finally stopped talking, I've suspected for a long time that this was what was behind your apology, but I still hoped I was wrong, that at least you, Rupert, were sincere. My son looked at me with despair. Dad, please don't listen to her. That's not what she meant. No, that's exactly what she meant. I shook my head. And you know it. The two of you didn't come here to make up. You came here to negotiate the division of property. But the problem is, there's nothing to divide. What do you mean? Rupert tensed. I mean that I've made a decision, I answered calmly. A decision I'd been pondering for the last few days. And even years, to be honest. The waiter brought the main courses, but neither of us were thinking about food anymore. I sipped my water and continued. All these years, I hid my fortune because I wanted you, Rupert, to grow up to be a man who valued the present. Hard work, honesty, the simple pleasures of life. But the opposite has happened. You've become obsessed with the trappings of success. Money, status, what others will think. That's not true, he began, but I stopped him with a gesture. It is, son, and your choice of wife, I nodded toward Claire, only confirms it. You chose someone with the same values, or rather, with the same lack of values. Claire opened her mouth to object, but changed her mind. Her eyes narrowed, clearly calculating the consequences of the conflict. I continued, and you know what the saddest part is? I blame myself for it. I thought it was my fault, that I didn't raise you right, didn't explain enough about what was really important in life. But now I realize everyone makes their own choices. And you've made yours. What decision are you talking about? Rupert asked quietly. I looked him straight in the eye. I rewrote the will, Rupert, and restructured the business. Claire straightened up sharply. What does that mean? It means that upon my death, Blue Harbor will be taken over by a foundation that will run the hotel according to my instructions. I spoke calmly, as if it was something that had been decided long ago. Employees who have worked at the hotel for at least 10 years will receive significant shares. The rest will go to community development, educational programs, small business support, scholarships for talented children from poor families. Claire's face showed shock, which quickly changed to fury. You can't do this. It's not fair. Unfair? I raised an eyebrow. What exactly is unfair about me disposing of my property as I see fit? Rupert looked stunned. But Dad, I am your son, your blood. Doesn't that mean anything? It does, I nodded. That's why the will stipulates that you will receive a monthly allowance, enough to live comfortably, but not luxurious, and on the condition that you participate in the Foundation's charitable programs, not with money, but with time, to help those less fortunate. Claire laughed, but there was no mirth in her laughter. Are you kidding? Rupert is the heir to Blue Harbor, and you want to turn him into a charity case on a payroll? Rupert is my son, I corrected, and Blue Harbor's heirs will be the people who put their heart and soul into it, who cared for it not out of self-interest, but out of love for their work. My son looked at me in disbelief, as if seeing me for the first time. Did you really do this? Disinherited me? No, I shook my head. I offered you another inheritance, an opportunity to be a better man, to help others, to find meaning in something more than hoarding money and status items. That's humiliating, Claire blurted out. Only if you see humiliation in helping others, I replied, which is sad in itself. Rupert looked crushed. He sat with his shoulders slumped, staring into a plate of cooling food. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded muffled. So, here's your opinion of me. You think me unworthy? I felt a prick of regret. Despite everything that had happened, he was still my son. The boy I'd taught to ride a bike, whose broken knees I'd bandaged, with whom I'd read books before bedtime. No, Rupert, I said more gently. I think you've lost your way, and I hope you find your way back someday, to real values, to what really matters. Claire stood up abruptly, her face contorted with anger. We will not stand for this. You can't do this to your own son. We will contest the will. I looked at her calmly. You can try, but I've thought this through carefully. My attorney is the best in the state, and frankly, an inheritance scandal would not be good for your social status. She froze, digesting my words. Then she grabbed her purse and threw it down. Let's go, Rupert. We have nothing to do here. My son rose slowly, still not looking me in the eye. You're going to regret this, Dad. Claire's right. It's not fair. Maybe, I nodded. But it's my decision, and I'm willing to live with its consequences. They walked away, leaving me alone at the table with an uneaten dinner. I watched them go, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and relief. It was as if I'd dropped a heavy weight I'd been carrying for too long. After paying, I walked out onto the restaurant terrace. The evening air was cool, fresh after the heat of the day. Down by the lake, the lights of Blue Harbor, my creation, my pride, my solace, were glowing. I thought about the decision I had made. Was it the right one? Was it too cruel? Was I wrong to deny my son what he had hoped for? But then I remembered the look on Claire's face when she talked about what they deserved. Remembered how easily Rupert had given in to her all those years ago. How he'd let her disparage his father while he thought he was poor. No, the decision was the right one. Painful, but necessary. Sometimes you have to let go of something you love so it can find its true path. I pulled out my phone and dialed Sydney's number. She answered after the second beep. Mr. Hardison, is something wrong? No, Sydney, nothing's wrong, I answered. I just wanted to let you know that the board of directors will be meeting tomorrow as planned, 10 o'clock in the morning. Of course, sir, everyone will be in attendance. I thanked her and hung up. Tomorrow I will officially announce the reorganization of the management of Blue Harbor, about the creation of a foundation that will hold a controlling interest after my death. Shares for employees who have worked at the hotel for more than 10 years. Sydney will get the biggest one. She's earned it with her dedication and hard work. It'll be a fresh start, not the kind Claire and Rupert were talking about for their own selfish purposes. A real new beginning based on the values I've always believed in. Labor, honesty, caring for others. My gaze went back to the hotel. 30 years ago, it was a bold step into the unknown, a risky bet on its own strength. Now the Blue Harbor is a respected business, a place where people find not only comfort and relaxation, but also a special atmosphere created with love and attention to detail. I did everything I could to make the hotel thrive after I left, to ensure that my life's work continued in the same spirit, with the same principles. The only thing I failed to do was to pass those principles on to my own son. As I walked down the stairs to the parking lot, I thought about Rupert, about how he had reacted to my decision. In his eyes, I saw not only disappointment at the loss of his expected inheritance, but something else. A glimmer of understanding, perhaps? A realization of how far he had strayed from the values I had tried to instill in him. Maybe this decision will be a sobering lesson for him. Maybe one day he'll realize that I didn't do it out of revenge or resentment, but out of love. Out of a desire for him to find something more in life than the pursuit of money and status. But for now I had to move on, to keep doing the work I loved, to take care of the people who truly appreciated what I had created. Getting in my car, I didn't drive home, but headed toward the hotel. At this hour, there was no more daytime bustle there, only the evening shift quietly going about their duties. I walked through the lobby, nodding to the staff, and went up to my office. Opening the window, I took a deep breath of the night air. From the lake came the light sound of waves crashing against the shore. Somewhere in the distance, music was playing, probably in the rooftop bar, the familiar, soothing sounds of a place that had become a second home to me. I sat down at the table and pulled out a picture of the three of us from the beach, me, Helen, and little Rupert, a happy family full of hope and plans for the future. I tried, Helen, I whispered, looking at my wife's smiling face. I honestly tried. What would she say now? Would she approve of my decision, or would she find it too harsh? Helen had always been gentler than me, kinder, always saw the best in people, even when they didn't deserve it. But she also believed in justice, that everyone should get what they deserve, and most importantly, that money is not the most important thing in life, that real wealth is in relationships, in love, in the ability to create something of value. I closed my eyes, imagining that she was here, right next to me, that she was putting her hand on my shoulder and saying, "You did the right thing, Anthony. It hurts, but it's the right thing." When I opened my eyes, there was no one in the room, of course, just me, my memories, and a decision that would change the future. I went over the paperwork the lawyer had prepared one more time. Everything was in order. Tomorrow would begin a new phase in the history of Blue Harbor, a phase in which my family, at least the part of it represented by Rupert and Claire, would not play the role I had hoped for. It was painful, but necessary. Sometimes the hardest decisions are the right ones. I stood up, walked over to the window. The sky above the lake was studded with stars. Somewhere out there, among those distant lights, perhaps Helen was watching me, approving of my choice. A choice in favor of principles we shared, in favor of values we believed in. And for the first time in a long time, I felt peaceful, as if the weight I'd been carrying in my heart all these years was finally beginning to go away. As if by letting go of what I had clung to for too long, I had found a new freedom. Tomorrow would be a new day, a day when I will finally turn this page of my life and begin the next, with no regrets and no looking back, with faith that I'm doing the right thing.